What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hops Geek News, a podcast that talks about comic books, movies, TV shows. Typically, yes, we are drinking a nice beer on the show. However, today we are not. It is the middle of the afternoon. We have kids to pick up from school. Come on, we are sometimes responsible adult human beings, very rarely. And without too much further ado, man, we got a really good episode for you guys as Jacob, Phillips, and Chris Condon are coming to join us to talk about the Enfield Gang Massacre from Image Comics. A fantastic, if you're like me, who grew up sitting with my grandfather watching Westerns, man, like the good old Westerns, the Clint Eastwood days, the John Wayne days. This is a 6-issue arc that really takes you back to those good old times. And maybe you're just on the fence about Westerns. And to me, I think Westerns are going to be coming back. So before we get there, though, go ahead, subscribe, all that good stuff. Hops Geek News is where you can find us, all your favorite podcasting platforms, social media. I'm the one that mainly runs Twitter. Lauren runs Instagram. And then we kind of dual hat the rest of the things. So find us on YouTube. And we have new episodes weekly. And so, Lauren, welcome. And everybody, what is up? Lauren, you're just drinking water, right? Any coffee, anything exciting?
No, there's lemon in my water, organic lemon.
Was it organic lemon, not from Waffle House this time?
Nope, not from Waffle House. They don't have organic lemons. We learned that the hard way a while ago.
That's okay. I found out the hard way that Dunkin' Donuts likes to put hair in bagels. So you know what? We all have our things.
I think you should have already known that, though.
We did. I did. I will never get over me just trashing Dunkin' Donuts as we're pulling in, and then lo and behold, there was a hair in my bagel. But you know what?
That's like that wasn't an accident. They like to put hair.
Well, you know, everybody always asks me, like, what is your obsession with Dunkin' Donuts? And I'm like, guys, I am just a man from Boston, Massachusetts, that when you're born, they baptize you with the rivers of the Charles River. And they also like throw an iced Dunkin' Donuts coffee in your hands. And that's what you survive off of for the first year of your life. And I don't know what it is. It's Stockholm syndrome, man.
I think there's some childhood trauma in there. He thinks he deserves it.
Should go to therapy. Should really go to therapy. But
I mean, it is what it is.
It's not great, but you know what? There's something about it. And that voice you hear right there is our friend Chris. Welcome to the show. Let's introduce you first, man. How are you doing? And let's give the folks a little bit of background into yourself.
Well, I apologize for jumping the gun.
No, you were good, dude. You were good.
Yeah. My name is Chris Condon. I'm the writer of the Enfield Gang Massacre, That Texas Blood, and a few other things. I do that. I wrote a thing called Hell's a Squared Circle. I have an upcoming adaptation of Barry Gifford's novel Night People from Oni Press, and I'm doing some EC Comics stories as well for them. And then some stuff I can't talk about yet, but there's more stuff in the future.
That's right. My story. I love NDAs, man. NDAs are always fun because it's builds the anticipation up for everybody. It's like, I got these things I can't talk about, but there are things. You just wait.
There are things. There are certainly things.
Yeah. And Jacob, welcome to the show yourself. How's it going? And a little bit about you.
Thank you for having us on. I draw some of the things that Chris writes. Enfield Gang Massacre, Texas Blood. I'm currently working on Megalopolis, graphic novel adaptation of the upcoming Francis Ford Coppola movie, amongst other things that can't be discussed. So it's just it's good that you can only see like this wall. So there's just like all the hidden things are that way.
Guys, I'm staring at the coolest of things, and only I get to see them right now. Yeah. No, but that's awesome. Thank you guys for coming to hang out. I've become familiar with your work over the last year or so, especially getting to check out the Enfield Gang Massacre, which to me, I was getting to review for Nerd Initiative, which is something we write comic book reviews every week for people out there. Check out Nerd Initiative every Tuesday and Wednesday. Soon to be only Wednesday with DC coming back to Wednesday releases, thank God, at 9 a.m. So from there, let's get into your kind of comic book origin stories. What kind of got you guys into writing and drawing comic books? What brought you into like this geek universe, so to speak?
You want to go first?
I can go first, sure. I just grew up with comics everywhere. Like my dad draws comics. I started going to shows when I was 11 years old, and sitting with him and making my own books and printing them at home and selling them at shows at my dad's table. I can't remember a time before I was reading comics. When my dad used to work for DC, and I would get the box of comps every month of everything they put out, so I could just go and leaf through it and pick out, whatever Batman or Teen Titans or whatever it is that I wanted to read. And then, I sort of, it was always there, but it was never something I really intended on actually doing myself, because I've seen how much work it is. I wanted to draw, but I didn't want to draw comics because comics are hard. And it's much easier, well, maybe not easier, but there's a lot less work in doing sort of straight illustration stuff that I was doing prior to entering into the world of comics. And then Chris sort of dragged me in. And I've been here since. Even with Texas Blood, it was never it wasn't originally intended to be a comic book. So I sort of came into it before that, and then we ended up doing it as a comic book, and I've been in it since. So it's been it's a lucky accident for my career, I think.
You're in the family business.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I feel like I try to get my kids to watch things and read things, and they don't want to. My son's named Logan, and he won't watch X-Men with me. I don't know what to do. So I love that you actually saw that and were like, oh, this is what my dad's doing, and you love it as well. So that's a really cool origin story, and one we have not had.
Yeah. And
so Chris, what's your origin story?
I was gonna say, yeah.
Oh, I've always loved comics. I didn't have anybody in the house that read comics or anything aside from the Sunday funnies, but I always loved art. My uncle was an artist, and I always kind of gravitated towards probably started with the Sunday funnies. Like I was like Peanuts and growing up in New Jersey, we had Mutts. Mutts was a creation of the guy who's from around here. We just had a Marvel book come out last year, I believe, or early this year. I just always gravitated towards comics and really kind of found them because of film and TV. There was the X-Men animated show and Batman the animated series, and all the Batman movies in the 90s, Spider-Man in the early 2000s, X-Men. But I think the actual first comic book I ever owned was because of sort of reviled Batman film, which is Batman and Robin. In 1997, they were... Dude,
those movies are so fucking good. I love them. They aren't good.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
they're not good, but they're amazing.
For them. But I think the consensus is that they're reviled.
Okay, so it's like Dunkin' Donuts, man. It's like, that's not good, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, no. I quite like Batman Forever. Batman and Robin is a little tougher to go through, except it does have a scene in which Batman and Robin fall into a vat of mint chocolate chip ice cream. If you do that in a movie, that's okay with me.
The back credit cards and all of those things.
In 1997 at Toys R Us, they gave away, if you bought something, I guess if you bought something Batman related, which of course that's all I cared about, they would give you a reproduction of the first appearance of Poison Ivy, or the first appearance of Batgirl, or the first appearance of Mr. Freeze. So my first introduction into actual, a comic book was probably that. Because again, my parents didn't read comics. My brother didn't read comics. I was the only one who ended up reading comics. I was the one who kind of haunted the local comic book store and, tried to get him to come down to $2 on this rare Daredevil comic, and he was unwilling. And so that was my life, was just buying, going and doing that. And I just always, because of that, I always was just writing and drawing my own stuff when I was a kid, and then it grew into realizing that if I can get Jake to draw my comic, I think I'd be better off. So that's what I ended up doing. So that's it. It's no crazy. There's no like eureka moment. It just sort of happened. I've always been doing it.
It's one of those things that, yeah, you just always kind of grew up, like the both of you guys, you've been kind of around it your whole life. And so it organically happened, which that's kind of the better stories, right? It's just one of those things that just feels natural. And I know Jacob has mentioned how you dragged him into it. You even mentioned you dragged him into it. So how did this team up come about? Like, what's the origin story behind that?
Well, I cold emailed Jake. I found his email on DeviantArt, I believe, or one of those sites that host artwork, and he had been doing the illustrations and the backups of his father's book with Ed Brubaker called Kill or Be Killed. And I was trying to get a movie made, and it's hard to get people to give you money to make a short film. So I was like, well, how can I get people to invest in this? And I was like, maybe if they could visualize the screenplay, because it's hard to get people to actually, see what you're trying to do unless you're actually showing them images. So I asked Jake if he wanted to do the concept art for it because I loved what he was doing. And I thought he had the perfect style for what I was trying to do, and also just in terms of concept art, he had a very kind of his illustration style was perfect for it. So anyway, I reached out to him just on DeviantArt, and I was like, "Hey, I want to do this thing. I feel like the screenplay, maybe you'll want to do it." And he said, "Yeah." And then just still just had no success with it. Yeah, we would have like I had made a short film in I think the previous year and made that for no money, and so the idea was to try to do this for a little bit more money and try to get a name star in it, try to boost our sort of stature in the industry, and it was just not going for whatever reason. So after a year or two of trying to get that made, just got frustrated, and I was already thinking about doing something else as a comic, which I was actually going to draw myself. Thank God I didn't. And I just reached out back out to Jake and I was, do you want to just do this as a comic? Because we both hadn't had anything comic wise. And I thought it'd be fun to just actually have this story out there and tell it. And I do think it's fun that, it wasn't, what we did, in terms of just enjoying comics our entire lives. The first thing we did wasn't, necessarily a comic booky idea. We kind of went with something that was just, a story that we wanted to tell.
Mm.
So that's how we got together. And
So
now
now-
we're best of friends.
Best of friends. I can tell.
He's over here like, God, I've been stuck with this guy ever since. Why did I answer that email?
We're even wearing the same. We even wear the same.
I know,
shirt.
right?
You guys coordinate outfits. Look at that.
I forgot my
Amazing.
flannel.
Now, before we go too much in, because I immediately wanted to start asking more questions, but let's actually talk a little bit about the comic we're here to talk about today, is Enfield Gang Massacre, which is a prequel to That Texas Blood. So do you guys want to give us a brief summary of that before we ask our specific questions pertaining to the specific comic, which just ended in January and will be in trade back very soon? So give us, if you were pitching this to someone who is maybe doesn't even read comic books, because this is a very unique story for a comic book. This is not your cliche typical superhero. This is very action filled, very Western, very sad, very surprising twist and turns. So how would you pitch this to somebody who, let's say, has never read a comic book and you're trying to convince them to read this?
Jake, how would you pitch it? Because I know I'd pitch it poorly.
Yeah, probably worse. A route in bad time.
That's
It's like a Thunder Mountain.
Yeah, I think that's a good quick pitch. I think I might say that it's a action-packed, dramatic Western. I think that it explores the line between good and evil, and if there is a line, or if it's just a blurred line. I don't know. It's just and it's also just a lot of action. There's a lot of good.
There's
Good, clean fun.
there's some really good good speaking of the action, like a lot of the sequences, especially that Jake draws, man, it's bloody, but the color aspects that you use for some of that is just absolutely gorgeous. And what made you guys settle on like a Western, and specifically this tale? Because you guys do some cool things. You kind of give like backstory and like historical, almost newspaper writings before you lead into the comic and as you're exiting the comic.
Yeah, that's Jake's fault. So Jake, in issue 7 of That Texas Blood, in the back matter, I reference something called the Enfield Gang Massacre. And I say something about it happened in 1875 and blah, 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 whatever I said. I don't really remember what I said. But Jake latched onto that and was like, were we ever going to see that? And I was like, well, sure, we could do that. And it turned into our next thing was we both were we had done 3 volumes of That Texas Blood. And it's not that we're tired of doing That Texas Blood. We like doing That Texas Blood and we like the characters that we get to play with. But it's, you don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again, essentially. So we were like, well, let's do this other thing and we'll take a break and, we'll do this Western because we both like Westerns. We both love Western films. And, we also are big fans of the comics, especially the Italian Western comics. It's funny that there's spaghetti Westerns in film, and then there's also, I guess, spaghetti Westerns in comics. I don't know what they call them exactly, aside from just Italian Westerns. But like Sergio Topi and there's a whole bunch of great Western comic artists, but we just thought it would be fun to do that, and it was really kind of Jake kind of spurring me on and kind of getting me to think about it, and it developed beyond whatever I had thought it was. It actually had originated way, way, way back in a pilot script that I'd written in 2013, and that was a totally different thing. But the idea of this gang called the Enfield Gang and having them do, having the thing called the Massacre, the Enfield Gang Massacre, really originated from them and just sort of stuck with me. And I, referenced it, and I throw out these references all the time in the back matter in like the hopes that, there's like threads to pull and we can get other stories here and there. So that's really, where it came from. But I'm sure Jake also wanted to draw some horses.
Oh yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, like, what's that like for you getting to play in a Western world? Because everybody has like these ideas of the Wild West. Will Smith had his own idea once upon a time that looked interesting, and we all have like these ideas of the Wild West. So what was like for you playing in this toy box?
It was cool. I think so. Me and Chris together visited Texas like 2 years ago, and that was the first time. And I've been drawing the book for like 3 years, but Texas Blood for like 3 years by that point, and I'd never been. So I'd like spent some time in towns and spent some time out in the desert and sort of all over West Texas, and it was like it like came to life, and I was like taking photos and so a lot of the landscapes that you see in the book I directly referenced from photographs that I took whilst I was out there. Like some of in the trade, we have some like design pages with photographs, and they're the photos that I took when I was out there. I put together like a newspaper sort of zine thing, big format, of some of the photos that I took when I was out there as well. So it was like I was sort of itching to draw this stuff. Like there's a lot of it in Texas Blood, but we don't use the landscape in quite the same way in that, because it's obviously a lot of it takes place in a town and it's in the modern era. So it was fun to be able to draw on that, and the excitement that it was when I got to see it all for the first time as well. And it's like it's like a sort of different world entirely, especially for me because I'm not even in the US. So it's like,
right.
Trust me, every time I have to go to Texas myself, I'm like, where am I at right now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we did a road trip. It's never ending. We drove from Florida to California, and Texas was like a good chunk of it. But it's beautiful watching the sunset, like when we're driving, and it's huge. So with you guys having worked together now for a while, how's that process with the story coming on the page? Do you guys have a pretty smooth process at this point? Is it a lot of back and forth, or is it just, I mean, because Jacob, your artwork is absolutely gorgeous and it's very unique as well. So how has that worked? Is this just one of those, like, Jacob knows what he's doing, he's got it? Or do you guys be like, well, I want this a little bit more like this, or this a little bit more like that to emphasize the story?
I think we trust each other just to get on with it, really. And also, because I am so bad at time management, we don't have time for tweaks at the end, particularly. So Chris gets what I draw. But no, I think
I like it.
Yeah.
Jake's like, I took the pictures. I know what's going on here.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, Chris usually says, I've got this idea, and then gives me the first script, and I start drawing it. And I don't know how it's going to end until it ends. Chris doesn't really give, I have a general idea of what's going on, but I don't know what's going to happen at the end. And so I'm reading it as if I am a reader myself, which is exciting. It keeps it fun for me. Not just like, oh, I've got 200 pages to draw. I know it's going to end up here. Now I need to start, and it's like going up that hill. Whereas this feels a lot more like, 20 pages, well, more like 27, 28 pages at a time, and being like, oh, cool, like this is what I get to draw this month, and get off and do it. And but yeah, I normally get a pretty finished script, in like one chunk, and then I go off and draw it, and I send Chris pages sort of every few days whenever I've drawn some pages, and he usually goes, cool, and then we do we move on.
Yeah.
So it's just,
well, I think that there's, he was saying that there's not a lot of time for stuff, and like that's sometimes true, but I also generally don't have any nitpicky sort of anything, because I like what he does, and I think that's works out for the both of us, that we both like what we do individually, so it works out that we get to do it, we both get to add our own things to it, and that's what makes our collaboration work. But like, we've done more work outside of just that Texas Blood, and like we both just got an email yesterday with like a bunch of notes on a thing that we're doing, and it's funny to me because I'm like looking at it and I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have had any of these notes. But like, it's good to have that sort of that balance. But I also generally just like what he does, and unless there's something like drastic, like, oh, this needs to be here because story wise that should be there, but I mean that rarely happens. We're all telling oh, we need this, we need that, because I think that one of the great things about being a comic writer is getting comic art into your mailbox, and it's just fun to look at it and go, ooh, I wrote that, and now it's there. It's just a really cool thing, and then to see it inked and colored and all that, it's one of the great joys. So I don't really think I'd get much enjoyment out of nitpicking anybody. I just the process is just fun. I mean, and I've been really fortunate that I've been able to work with people like Jake that I like their stuff and I get along with them, and I'm happy just to do that.
Yeah.
I think as well, because we don't have an editor like on the book, because we're with Image. They edit in terms of, they read through it and tell us when we've got a spelling mistake or whatever. But it's creatively, it's all down to us, and it's only the two of us. There's no letterer, there's no colorist, there's none of that. So I think it's like the most straightforward it could possibly be. Like Chris writes it, gives it to me, I draw it, and we send it to Image. And it's like when we have worked with editors and stuff, it's just like, I appreciate the input, and they can help sometimes. They're like really helpful, and we'll see things that I wouldn't have seen or something like that. But a lot of the time, it's like I wish I was just sort of left alone to do it. But I think we've been spoiled by working with Image. Like, first book is with Image, and it's sort of the best you can get in terms of that kind of situation. So it's like, yeah, we've definitely been spoiled in that regard.
Well, and
Well,
you're
yeah,
playing in a world you created, so you don't have the rules of DC or
Yeah.
Marvel or anything. So that's got to be very freeing.
Yeah. Although when we did do a DC story, DC basically left us alone,
Yeah, that's
which
true.
was great. We did a Harley Quinn short story, and Matthew Levine, our editor, basically. I mean, we basically it's out of continuity, so we were allowed to do whatever we wanted,
Mm.
and so that so we've been fortunate in that way too. Is that we've done sort of when we have done a big two thing, it happened to be something that we were able to just run away on. I believe that we got some notes here and there on some of this, but there were more granular.
right. No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And kind of going back to these characters, I think what you guys did something really interesting with these characters is now it's very easy in a book that's about a gang to write them as the villain of the story, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, things aren't as black and white in this book. And if I walked away personally, like the cops and especially the Suedo sheriff that took over, not necessarily the good guys of the situation. So what was that like for you deciding how to frame this story as what you wanted readers to take away from it, whether it's the good guys, the bad guys, or like the overall message of the story?
Yeah, I mean, we were, that Texas Blood is about a sheriff and the sheriff's office. So we're generally focused on like the good guys, the sheriff, the sheriff, like the cops are the good guys. And in refocusing for Enfield, one of the things that I and going back to that original pilot that I talked about, I mean, in that, Enfield was a bad guy, and there was no bones about it. I mean, it started off with like a stagecoach that gets robbed, but he was just like brutal and mean, and it became like a big standoff between him and like the sheriff's office or whatever. I don't really remember the details of it, but he was the bad guy. But in my education on Texas and Texas history, and it comes down to stuff as popular as like the Alamo, a lot of what you hear is not necessarily the truth. And I mean that's definitely the case throughout history. History is written by the victors. That cliche, but in Texas. There's this. The Texas Rangers was a big part of what I wanted to do because they've so whitewashed their history. We're trying to make them into the good guys when the history is actually very muddy and dark and bordering on villainous. And so I wanted to tell a story in which this gang, who are outlaws, and they're definitely doing that stuff that's outside the law, but the reaction to them is so just out of the ordinary, and just I really wanted to just hit home that there were people that this sort of whatever we consider frontier justice was barbaric, just as barbaric as what they considered barbarous.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I enjoyed the castration of the wife beater though, and you calling that frontier justice. I giggled at that part.
Well, so that's just something I wanted to play with, and it was just looking at the history and the rewriting of history and that whole thing, especially in Texas history.
And is that what led you to kind of put that into the actual comic book, seeing that the history is not as it seems? Because that was a big part of the storytelling in this, and part of what made it such an amazing story.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely part of it. It was also the other part of it was also that we had a very short amount of pages to tell a lot of story, and we were constricted to we gave ourselves the 3-panel page and splash page rule, which is the Darwin Cook rule, kind of from New Frontier. So we kind of constricted ourselves in that way, and so there's not a lot of real estate to tell a story. But I mean, that did allow me, that did force me to kind of stretch certain new muscles and figure out a new way to tell a story in a short amount of pages. But it also, in having that back matter to explore that, it allowed me space to further tell the story, which is why we're also including that back matter in the trade, because I felt like it became integral to the story. Whereas the
Oh,
back matter we
definitely.
typically use in That Texas Blood is ancillary. It's not necessarily necessary to
Part
read.
of it. Okay.
It helps, but it's not necessary. Whereas with this, I felt like it was more necessary, and it really did help to flesh out character and motives and things like that. Yeah, that definitely played a role. The first article that I wrote was pretty lengthy, and I really did want to set out to do that. I didn't necessarily know that we were going to be telling this huge, sprawling story in the back matter, but it was definitely a part of what I wanted to do.
And now on the opposite end of that, kind of talking about, I mentioned this is a bloody story, and it's like not always black or white. So Jake, what was it like for you? Was there any moment where you're like, did you just automatically, yeah, dude, we're in a shootout. We need to make this, like, this has to do its thing. What was it like for you creating some of these like pretty graphic scenes?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most gory stuff that we've done. A lot of the time what we do is sort of like the violence is sort of off panel, whereas here we sort of didn't shy away from it nearly as much. And it's good fun, but I don't think it's gratuitous. I think it's sort of like
Well, it serves the story.
It's necessary.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there wasn't any like, oh, we're just gonna do this.
It's not like The Boys, which I love. But yeah, that's good for that.
And I think I hope each sort of death packs the punch it was intended to have, because it's, obviously we're picking off members of the gang through the series, and yeah, that's sort of, you want that to take an emotional toll rather than just be like, oh, that's cool, like, look how much, look at his head explode, which does happen. But no, it's good fun, and I think it's the most sort of action-packed thing that we've done, and that's, it's a new muscle to stretch. And think like I think that I excel at the quiet sort of human aspects of storytelling, so it was good fun to practice doing this sort of thing, which isn't necessarily what I consider my strong suit, but I think I did an okay job of it. But it's
I would say you
hopefully
did.
Anyway,
you did some really cool things with like the colors too. I mean, especially when you were showing some of these deaths, there was a lot of like dark blues and kind of like purples and things like that. What went into choosing how to color these things?
Well, it's the same way I approach when I'm coloring anything. I color my dad's stuff as well, and it's with something like when I'm doing someone else's work, it's probably even more at the forefront of my mind is the storytelling aspect of the colors. I think you can sort of forget that that's part of the storytelling toolkit, which I try not to do. I try and keep it there, even though a lot of this series is sort of like bright, vibrant colors, which sort of goes against what you see in a lot of Western comics. A lot of time it's sort of that muted sepia tone kind of thing. And I wanted to stray away from that. I want, like, even going into it, before we started drawing anything, I was like, I want orange tones and blue skies. I think that would, like, that would be cool, like Technicolor.
Oh, it's very visually beautiful, like just vibrant, yeah.
And then a lot of it takes place in in the rain. So it's trying to balance that, and something like the barn scene. I wanted to make it so it wasn't just brown. So it's trying to get around that and find that way to convey what you're trying to convey, and that just made sense to, especially the second issue of the barn scene. It was sort of, it makes sense to bathe everything in red. And that's like definitely an intentional choice, and it fits thematically through it. So it's like, trying to find a thematic or like story-driven reason for it, rather than just like what looks nice. But there is also obviously a lot of that as well, because you want it to draw people in, you want it to look nice and look good on the page. But it's trying to find that balance is always good fun.
Oh, for sure. And kind of adding to the emotionalness of it is, as you guys tie this whole thing up, the ending was actually surprisingly emotional. Like, I didn't expect to feel, I guess, these kind of like almost empathetic emotions when Enfield obviously is being hung, and then the realization
Well,
that
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that's not really a spoiler because you start off right away with his corpse.
Yeah.
So,
yes. And the title of the book.
Yeah.
yes, I mean,
I like to
It was
remind
amazing
people.
how many people were shocked by
We did an
they're
interview.
dead. Well, it is called The Mask. Yes.
Yeah, we did an interview with comicbook.com, this guy Adam Barnhart, and one of his questions was about, was there any hope at any point, or did you always plan on killing him? And I was like, well, it was in the title.
It was there all along.
We're not, we start off with his corpse, being, pranced
We should have
around.
called it "He Dies at the End." That would have.
Yeah.
That would have really.
He dies. It's just
He didn't just die. Like you just mentioned, they parade his corpse around. Like, that's bad. That's metal, man.
Yeah. Well, it's wanted to let anybody who hasn't read it know that's not a spoiler. You're introduced with that immediately. It's how it all goes down that's incredibly interesting, and what goes down after he dies.
Yeah. So it was very much a sort of, I felt like we knew what was going to happen. So it's just like, okay, how do we get there? And how does it end up happening? Like we know he's going to die, and we know it's going to be a result, or at least like we imply it's going to be a result of the massacre, which is like, how does it happen? And I kind of wrestled with that myself, is that I knew that I kind of wanted to do, take a kind of big swing narratively with the final issue. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like what Jake was talking about with just having the violence, but have the violence be emotional, have it be not just to have violence for violence sake. I really wanted to push that the your sympathy towards the characters and feeling empathetic towards them and their plight. And I really wanted to push that and kind of give you some, not just like as a storytelling tool, just to give you some hope, and then to have that be hammered in. Oh no, this is not going well, and so that's where the violence came in. And I do think that Texas is a very violent place also, so that's a lot of history of violence. So this is not something that is outside of the norm.
This is very normal for Texas, yes, especially in those days.
Especially in those days. But so it just felt like it was necessary to do. But yeah, I'm glad that you had an emotional reaction to it, and a lot of people have said that they've had emotional reactions to it.
Well, you guys kind of set it up too, though, to kind of, because there is a point where you're almost like, well, they didn't. You're rooting for them, because it's like, well, no, they didn't commit the crime that they're kind of accused of, and there's like some confusion going on, and then of course you've got like this real asshole, bullish sheriff coming in, kind of setting the stage. And so there is a point where you're rooting for these guys, and there's that very kind of almost heroic scene where they've got like the Gatling gun, they're taking one for the team out there. There's a big shootout outside that barn, and so it's hard not to root for the guys. It almost comes naturally, and I think that's a testament to what you guys did.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to make these characters feel real and relatable, even though it's set 200 years in the past. And also, we're only going to see these characters for 6 issues.
Right.
And so you have to tell a full story in 6 issues. And, if you're trying to make it an emotional story in those 6 issues, and then we also literally have, like I said before, 3 panel pages and splash pages. So we have very little real estate to actually invest you in these characters, and the fact that we were able to do that, I think, just sort of, I don't know, it means that it worked, but I was convinced that I had screwed up, but I luckily had Jake to help help elevate me. I felt like I was floundering, but I did feel like there is definitely things that I'm proud of in this series, and looking back on it now, I'm very proud of it. But as I was writing it, I felt hampered by the constraints and was worried that it wasn't going to feel the way that I wanted it to feel. But luckily, I have somebody like Jake who is so good at just what I like to refer to as the acting in the panels, and just he's able to get these characters to feel real and to get the action to feel immediate and intense. It really helped elevate whatever I had written and brought it to its where it needed to be. I don't know.
Right. Well, and having those pages at the end with the news article and then the interviews and all that was such a creative way to tell more of the story and give background and almost create more emotion to those characters. Because again, yeah, we watched something from 1800 years ago and we're like, whatever, they'd all be dead now anyways. And like I feel like it takes a little extra step to humanize those characters and make people remember these were real people with real lives. And like back then, like you had to do what you had to do to survive. So with this being a Western themed comic, did you guys have any Westerns, TV shows or movies that kind of inspired you or that you loved growing up that kind of made you want to write a Western?
I definitely did. I'd like to hear what Jake has to say because he's also not from America.
I was wondering that as well.
Because I don't think I really grew up watching them particularly. Like my parents aren't particularly into Westerns. Like, I watched Butch Cassidy as a kid, and I revisited that. I've seen that many times before, but I revisited that whilst I think I sat inking whilst I watched it, like on the
cool.
I revisited the Dollars trilogy and stuff like that. Like, I was sort of trying to, evoke that kind of classic Western. I didn't want to focus too much on sort of like modern takes,
like cliches,
yeah, and just like I wanted it to feel somewhat like dated in the way that it comes across, rather than coming across as like a really modern take on a sort of classic story. So I revisited a lot of those kind of things. But then, I took a lot of screen grabs from that kind of thing, and like some of it even made it into the story in the background. Some of the backgrounds are from like the Dollars trilogy and stuff like that. But trying not to just do a poor imitation of that, trying to bring something new to it as well. But yeah, like I think I watch a lot of films in general, so that always comes into it in some way. I think quite cinematically rather than purely in terms of comic books. So I think, it's all ingrained in what I'm doing anyway. And I think you can't escape it when you're working on something like this. Even if you try to be like, no, I'm not going to think of any of that stuff. It all comes in some way, which I think makes it a richer experience for everyone. I think if you can see things and pick out things that you love out from other things and put it together.
Make it your own. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting take. Yeah. Cause for us, it's like, we kind of grew up, like I grew up watching Westerns, but then you don't think about it. Like you kind of have to search them out more so being from, the UK and things like that. Those are things we don't think about. And then especially I like seeing, it's almost the outside perspective of the whole Westerns and everything like that. And I thought you did a really great job, again, with the art. It's one of the just absolutely stunning comic books that I've read, especially in the last year, just visually.
Thank you.
And Chris, which ones did you look to for inspiration?
I mean, definitely Butch Cassidy. That was definitely an inspiration because I love that movie. It was one of the first Westerns that I can remember watching and loving when I was a kid. And one of the ones that really kind of stuck with me was My Darling Clementine, which is a John Ford Western. And it ended up finding its way into our story, where I ended up using My Darling Clementine, the song, but actually used the lyrics that we know actually originated somewhere around like 1890 or something, or like 1885. So it actually, if we were going to use it, we had to use this earlier version of it, which we did. And that's why it's these weird lyrics, and it's just that this is how it predates the song. But I wanted to include that because I just felt like there was something in that song that was sort of sad and could be a little creepy too. It's a song about a guy whose wife is dead. And he's lamenting the loss, but anyway, it's like a sort of, as a thing that I wanted to include. So there was that, and I reread a Richard Matheson Western called Journal of the Gun Years, and I just kind of dabbled here and there and read a bunch of stuff. The Sergio Topi stuff that I mentioned before, reread that, and there's so much. All the great John Ford Westerns I was watching, and trying to remember if there was anything specifically from like the 70s or anything that I was watching, but The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Oh man, that's a one I haven't in a long time. Oh man.
Yeah, and so that kind of played into the whole like the rewriting of history thing as well, was that, and The Wild Bunch is another Sam Peckinpah that the sort of the violence of that was something that I wanted to work into the book as well. So there's a whole bunch of influences, and not just from Westerns. There was a lot of other stuff too that wound up coming into the book. But yeah, I just to do the wraparound the way that we wanted to do it, I just always kind of was fascinated with like Buffalo Bill's, traveling Western circus. Was always kind of fascinated with that idea, and the idea that they did this to Jesse James, or they put him in like a car, they took pictures with him, and you could pay a dime or whatever to take a picture. So we just kind of transposed that and made it into Enfield, and made up the thing about like, if you look into his eyes, like you'll see his death or something, which seems like something that they would have said. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of influences, just like real life stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that I had read. There was a Texas Rangers podcast on Texas Monthly, and I also read Texas Monthly, so that's another thing. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know. Everything just comes together, and it's sort of, you just throw everything,
like melds together. Yeah. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one last question that we kind of have too is, I know there was kind of talking about a song there. There's actually a QR code that leads to a Spotify playlist.
Yeah.
How did you guys pick the songs for this playlist?
I think Jake actually had a few songs that he wanted to put on this one too.
That Johnny Cash song,
yeah,
but I think the rest of it was all you, I think.
Yeah. So, and the Texas Blood QR codes for the playlists, those were generally just, I would put together songs that were sort of influences in my writing, but also that I thought would help amplify whatever we were saying in the story. And I like the idea of it's not one per issue, it's just one for the series. And it kind of, as you read and progress in the story, the way that the songs hit you might change. If you want to do that, it's there. If you don't want to, it's fine too. But that's how I came from it. I came to it was, trying to pick songs that I thought were analogous to what was happening in the comic, and sort of set a mood. Then Jake's editions as well also did the same thing, sort of had that mood setting quality to them. And just sort of you just have you have songs that sort of evoke like a duel, and then you also have sort of like somber songs that evoke just
Mm-hmm.
a more emotional quiet scene and things like that. So I just try to do that. I feel like that adds an element to the comic, to the story, to the experience of reading the comic, because I've always loved, one of the things that I loved about comics is that there's it's a very personal experience, because you're not just sitting and watching a movie where it's like everything's happening at you, but you actually have to interact with it. And that kind of came out of my love of the Matt Kent series, Mind Management, where you have notes in the margins and in the gutters of the comic. And so I always loved that, and how I got immersed into the world of the comic that way. So I always wanted to do that with the playlist and with the back matter, and just really draw people into the story and make them feel involved in the story and be emotionally invested in the story and beyond. Hopefully people liked songs on the playlist, and they might add that to their own playlist, to their own rotation, as it were. But yeah.
I love that. I always love when like the music and the comic and all that stuff, because there's always inspirations. We always draw from inspirations, and it doesn't always have to be movies. And so there's also a chance to be like, hey, here's our favorite songs, for example, and this what inspired this, and it's always something unique. And I'm a playlist guy. I go back to the days of burning CDs all the time. It's something I always do. Now it's a Spotify playlist. So to me, I always love like
not
music.
As cool, but it's still pretty good.
It is. It's like it's not as cool because you don't get to like
Skip
open up, and it does skip a lot less. But I can't just hand my Spotify playlist over to like my wife or something. Like, here you go today. Happy Valentine's Day. It doesn't mean the same.
You need to print QR codes for it and like do it as.
That's right.
That's
right. QR codes are the future. I'm glad they're coming back too, because I feel like it leads to exciting things. You can put them in a comic, and you get to scan it and be like, "Oh, dude, this playlist." And you're finding.
I do think there's like adding things like that to the book is like, you want to sort of pack the 30 pages with as much stuff as possible. We have the pinups, we've got the back matter, we've got the letters pages, the main story, any sort of like design stuff, like even like down to the inside front cover was like designed off like a catalog from the time with with all the indicia stuff on it and stuff like that, and even the price and stuff. Originally I was thinking, I'll find some funny real examples of stuff they would have in these catalogs, and they would change it every month. But due to time restrictions, they ended up just keeping it the same one. But like even stuff like that is like trying to bring people in as much as possible.
Yeah.
And create a world.
And create a world and give people a reason to stick around or pick it up in the first place.
It's immersive, People feel like they're a part, like you guys said, they're a part of what you guys are doing, and it kind of is a way for them to connect more with what you guys are doing. And it's a really good idea.
When there's so many comics come out every week, and you need a reason to pick up our one, I guess. And even like with the trade, we've got an extra 6 pages of story in the back, so it's like again a reason to go out and pick it up, either again or just for the first time. But it's trying to give people a reason to actually go and get it, and give them as much stuff as we possibly can.
And the design of the book is really beautiful as well, and that's one of the things that I kind of love about what Jake did with it. And like he said before that he used some of the photos that he took when we were in Texas for that, and it's just that even that I feel like is an immersive thing that it brings you into. It's not just his pencil drawings, and you're also seeing Texas as he sees it, like literally.
And the paper stock as well that we use was intentionally, using newsprint was an intentional choice, again, to just add to the whole vibe of the book and make it as immersive as possible. And
is the trade back?
Yeah, that's going to be in the same paper as well.
Which is pretty rare. I don't think that they often do trades in newsprint. But that's a conversation that we usually have before. That's really where, I think that our sort of discussions about things really start, and what we really think a lot about, for example, when we were doing Enfield and we were talking about, okay, we'll do 3-panel pages, we'll do splash pages, we'll do this, the back matter, the way we're going to do the back, we're going to do newsprint, and the way that we kind of think about that stuff. And we even thought about how we're branding it. Texas Blood, should we have the Texas Blood logo on it? Should we not? How do we include it? Like that's really where our discussions in terms of where we're just like where we meet and we'll talk about stuff. Yeah. That's what we talk about. We don't necessarily talk about story or anything like that. What we talk about is the little fine details of things, which I think are very important. And I think that it's one of the things that maybe sets us apart. Is that we really do spend a lot of time just thinking about how are we going to package this, because I think the packaging is as much a part of it as the story. I mean, we definitely care about the story, and we spend a lot of time in the story and how we tell it, but we also want to make it a unique, immersive, interesting package for you as a reader picking it up. Because personally, I came from just being a reader, so I'm aware of what works for me and what I want to have.
Oh, same.
So I know what kind of experience I would enjoy, and so if I'm able to do something, if we're able to do something together, that's something that I think that I might actually enjoy as just a reader. I think that goes a long way.
I think the more we do it, the more I notice it, or even the lack of it in other books that I read. It's like, I can be loving the story, but if the design's off, there's loads of beautifully designed books, but it's if something's off, you're like, oh, I wish they hadn't put it on this really shiny paper, or stuff like that. And it's like, because even though I'm dreading that the trade's gonna be too thin because it's on this paper, but it's 200 pages long, so I think it'll be fine. But it's just like things like that. It's like you have to sort of balance that and like think, when it shows up, is it going to be a substantial object? Because that's part of it as well. Is like you're paying $16 or whatever for this book, and you want it to be a substantial thing, for people to put with their money, especially when people are getting more and more into manga, where you can spend much less on much more. So you need it to be something worth owning, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I think, and then that's a good thing too. Like Chris said, he came from being a reader, a fan, and that plays a lot into it. And like you said, we're very aware of what we want in our hands and what's going to work for us, and hopefully that translates out. And that's something really good to be self-aware of. And I know I'm going to be buying the trade. I know Lauren is. Final order cutoff is March 4th for the trade, and April 9th is when the trade is going to be hitting the stands. So what are some of the final thoughts you guys have? What is the last thing you have to say about the Enfield gang before we wrap up here?
Well, one thing that the new 6-page story taught us is that maybe there's more to do with this gang. And just because the story ended in the Enfield gang massacre, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not more Western story to tell. So that's definitely something that we can pull that thread if we want to and do. And if there's interest in it, we'll definitely pursue that. So that's kind of one of the things. But I'm also just really honored by the reaction that it's had. We run a number of year-end lists, and that means a lot. But it's also just the notes we get from readers means a lot to me, especially when it's about them reacting emotionally to certain scenes or certain characters or the storyline in general.
Jake, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, basically just to echo what Chris said, I think when we get these emails off readers, is just it's the best thing, because we spend a lot of time sat in our rooms by ourselves. Me and Chris live halfway across the world from each other. Yeah. And so we're very much just in there by yourself, creating it every day, and you have no idea. I'm sending these pages off. I've got no idea if anyone's going to even look at them, let alone like them. So the response that we've had has just been great, and hopefully it continues in the trade. Hopefully people like what we're doing, and people like the new story as well. And hopefully we get some new readers in to that, and hopefully that leads to people discovering Texas Blood if they haven't already read that. And hopefully people are along for the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have done something amazing. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I know I did myself. I know Lauren did. We were chatting about it. I've been raving about it for the past 6 months or so. And so people, make sure you guys pick this up. And then last thing is, where can people find more of your work? Where can they find you? Whether it's social media, whether it's anywhere out there in the world.
We have a Patreon together where we post all sorts of things. Chris does a podcast every month, and we do newsletters and behind the scenes stuff, sketches. We do postcards every month. Chris writes letters to people, all sorts of stuff. I'm on Instagram and Twitter as well. That Jacob Phillips, I think it is.
Good news, everybody. It's actually going to be in the notes of the show, so you can also look in the notes of the show, or just search the name. Yes.
Okay. Look in there for the for my Instagram handle. But yeah, I'm on. We're posting all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not on Instagram at the moment. I'm trying to wean myself off of social media, although I understand that it's integral.
It's that necessary evil sometimes. Like, it's exhausting.
Yeah. But yeah, I have that sort of addictive personality where I find myself like on that. That's why I got rid of Instagram, was that I found myself on it for like an hour and a half one day, and I was like, "What happened to that time?"
You fell down a hole.
I am on Twitter and Blue Sky, although I don't really check.
I don't
too much.
We have Blue Sky too, and I'm never. Yeah.
At Christoph Condon, it's Christopher without the ER. That's the same handle on both. And yeah, the Patreon. And Matt, I wanted to thank you for your great reviews.
Thank you. Yeah,
they were a joy to read. And yeah, this was a fun talk. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for doing this, and thanks for
thank you for having us on.
For having us. And
seriously, like
listening. So
anytime you guys want to come through and chat about anything you're doing, you're more than welcome back here. We're not going anywhere, and feel free, swing on through. We love what you guys are doing out there. You're doing some really amazing work. People, make sure you pick up this comic book. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. And like I said, man, I'm starting to think like this could be the start of like some Westerns making a comeback. Especially big time.
I think it might be.
I hope so. It was a lot of fun. Lauren, any final thoughts?
No, Matt was raving about it for a while. I read all 6 issues last week, and yeah, I instantly fell in love with it. And it took me by surprise, man, that ending.
It did.
That it was a very unique ending, and it was really surprised me, and I genuinely loved it. So, and I don't want to say what it is because everyone else should go read it.
Yes, go read it. It is very emotional. It is a very great comic book. It's coming out April 9th is where you can pick up the trade. Or if you just want to pick up all 6 issues, guess what? It's out there in the comic world right now. Do that. Pick it up. Read it wherever you buy your comic books from, whether it's digitally, whether it's in a comic book store. Me personally, I like to have the physical copy in hand. So, I'm at my local comic book shop. It is also New Comic Book Day today. So get on over there. While you're picking up your new weekly DC, Marvel, whatever it is, comics, grab the Enfield Gang Massacre, out now. Thanks again, guys. We will be chatting to you guys soon. And everybody else, we'll see you guys next week. And cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.